So, Tim, this has been an exciting year for you already, even though we're only in March, because you've had published your short story, The Girlfriend. Could you tell us a little bit about your inspiration?
Yeah, well, a Keats poem, La Belle Dame sans Merci, should be seen as a kind of master key or code with which you can unlock the secrets of the story. So there are lots and lots of references to Keats and the poem in the story. So you have a direct quote from the poem at the end, you have the dedication at the beginning, there are names of places, so Norm works at Belle and Dame Chartered Accountants, and there's the Grotto Pub and the Meads and so on and so on. And you have characters, well, obviously Norm is just the narrator of the Keats poem, you know, the normal man, if you like, and Zoe is obviously La Belle Dame. But then the names of the characters, you have Marcus Knight, you know, and we have Mr. Sedgwick, remember the sedges withered from the lake, and there's Lily, I see a lily on thy brow, and then we have Keats himself, the sickly scribbler called John at the beginning of the story, and so on. So I suppose part of the nerdy pleasure of the story is this kind of literary conundrum, this puzzle. You can, it's a kind of almost literary train spotting pleasure where you can, look for all the different references and see the relationships, and it's the kind of thing that appeals to people like puzzles or crosswords or something.
What about life inspiration? Is there anything that you've used from your own life experiences that have gone into the short story?
There were a couple of things that had happened in my life at the time that were very important in terms of the genesis of the story. So one thing was a long-term relationship came to an end. So the story was kind of a testament to human freedom, in particular the freedom of the woman to leave, to move on. And at the time, I remember reading this Keats poem, and it's tremendously emotionally powerful. It's such a wonderful representation of loss, of lost love, the sheer isolation of it, the sheer desolation of it. In fact, for me, it's the greatest representation of Latin literature. So the story was a reminder to myself to let the girl go. And of course, I suppose I'm wise enough, old enough anyway, to know that. So it's a kind of instructional manual to young men. You can't control your partner, your woman, your love. Love will only last temporarily, and then things will end. Now, a second thing that happened that fed into the story was, at the time my sister died of cancer, and obviously this was a terrible period for her and for everybody who loved her. And for me, it was kind of a double loss, because there was this end of a long-term relationship and then this death. And I wanted to kind of link these two notions of lost love and lost life, mortality. So we have Zoe, the character, which is, in Greek, izoi, is life. And so she's a representative of life at its fullest, of life when you're in love. And love is this temporary phenomenon that is incredibly rich, and I like to think of life in that way, in the grand historical perspective. We're just specks of dust in history, with little flowers that bloom in the desert for a moment and then disappear. And so I wanted to link love and life in the character of Zoe. And as a contrast, of course, Big D is death. The Big D is death. Big D has sort of pale warriors tattooed down his arm. So this poem by Keats, I think, does link these things. I think his poetry is incredibly poignant about life. You know, there's this incredible desire for life, this incredible sensuousness of his poetry. And yet there's this continual knowledge of death, and of course that poor man died very young, almost a boy, 26, 25, 26, and he was aware he was dying. He'd studied medicine, so there is this kind of tragic poignancy about his poetry, and I wanted to capture an element of that in the story. I mean, and you get these wonderful images in Keats, which some of which are repeated in the story, and phrases, she made sweet moan. Have you ever heard a kind of nicer kind of description of human love than that?
So Keats knew he was dying all the time he was writing poems?
Well, he studied medicine, so he was a doctor. He knew he had consumption, whatever they called it there.
Interesting. But perhaps we should stay with our topic, which is your fantastic short story. So could you tell us about the narrative form? The narrative form is quite interesting in the short story. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, in terms of narrative form, starts as a first-person narrative. And everything's from Norman's point of view. It's his life, his falling in love, his tragic relationship, his sense of isolation and loss, and so on. And it's first person all the way through until the addendum, and there the narrative point of view shifts into the third. Or does it? I guess does it? It appears to, unless it's it could be Norman reporting events at a distance, and so it appears to shift into the third, but because he's not actually present. I kind of wanted to leave this ambivalence to it, but anyway, there is this shifting point of view, but what kind of continues is, if you like, the set of relationships. So the structure is cyclical. It ends where it began, with Zoe now with a new boy, and the language is almost exactly the same. I repeated it, so the cycle begins again. Norman is left behind, he's gone, there is new life, new love begins. Yeah.
And Zoe continues on her way with new men, so life goes on with these new blooming flowers for this brief time.
Yeah, it's a great symbol of reoccurring life. Zoe's just a symbol of this. Symbol of the most powerful element of life and of life itself.
Because I wanted to ask you about the characterization of Zoe, because she's this amazing character. You want to know more about her, but maybe that is not the point if she's a symbol for something greater and bigger.
Yeah, I mean, she's not really, in a sense, she's not, I'm not even sure that any of them are holistic characters. Maybe you could say Norman, and Norman is obviously Norm, the normal man, the everyman, He's quite a superficial character in many respects. I mean, he's not that likeable, he's an accountant, for God's sake,
Yeah, he's quite pitiful, isn't he?
He's pathetic, he's weak, he's doesn't know what's happening to him. He's in a constant state of confusion, of experience, of things happening to him that are beyond his control or understanding. And that's the everyman bit, I suppose. I mean, I wouldn't say he's completely loathsome. He has elements of sensitivity, albeit usually about things that concern himself.
So, there's some sex in the short story that could be considered quite graphic. Could you elaborate on the importance of sex in the short story?
Yeah, well, I suppose in relation to sex, there's there's some crude sexual language or images. Marcus draws these pictures, and that's kind of, I suppose, representative of a certain kind of boyish attitude prevalent in contemporary culture towards sexuality. And these things are, of course, just MacGuffins, just plot tools to move the story along, to provoke Norman to action and so on. But of course that doesn't represent the reality of the sexual relationship between Zoe and Norman, which is a kind of overwhelmingly powerful, this combination of sexual desire, of love. Norman is almost, shocked, abused, overwhelmed by it.
Fascinating. So how might this piece of literature inform your future works?
In theory, not at all. But in practice, it might actually, because the publisher wants me to write a few stories based around poems. So, that wasn't kind of my original. I didn't set out to write a number of stories around poems. Although this was kind of consciously, inspired at least by the Keats poem, which then I kind of brought into the story quite closely. But the publisher wants me to write another couple at least based around poems, so I'm thinking of doing that, but they'll all be very different. I think I've got an idea for one round, a Browning poem, My Last Duchess, called The Artist. But I haven't written it yet, so.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the publishers are keen on that when they didn't actually publish the full poem at the end.
They wouldn't let me. Yeah.
I remember you saying that you wanted the complete La Belle Dame sans Merci at the end, and it's only one verse.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me. I don't know why, because it's out of copyright. So it's. But I asked, and they said, "You're not in control of what the publishers do."
True enough.
I think we've milked that one to death, haven't we?
Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for your time. Yeah. They say you should never talk about your own stories.
Do they?
I think so. I don't know
I
if
really
they
like
are.
that you talked about it.
Oh, okay.
Very interesting. Because I really was fascinated by Zoe.
I didn't talk about her character. I talked about Norman, didn't I? Yeah, so obviously her name, means life, so that's what she represents. And obviously she's the La Belle Dame of the Keats poem. She's the object of desire, the fancy creature, the thing the male characters love. But more than that, I wanted to make her kind of real in her own sense. So because she is this creature that experiences love again and again, she has a wealth of human understanding. So although she's represented as beautiful and young and the object of the male character's desire, she is wise in herself. She understands human behaviour, she understands reality, she understands love. She is saddened by the fact that Norman lashes out in violence, that love turns to hatred so quickly, or despair, and so on. So this saddens her, but ultimately, she's a free creature. She's in control of everything. She's in control of Norman. She understands. She knows. And Norman is just, wallowing in a kind of total confusion and lack of understanding about reality. So she's the subject who knows, she's the wise creature, she's the person that understands human reality and human love, and is constantly, I suppose, saddened by that. So although the story has a kind of postmodern feel to it, really it's an old-fashioned moral fable. It's a plea to young men to let go, grab love and life when it comes, live life to the full, but respect human freedom, the freedom of your woman. Let go when you have to. You can't control love any more than you can control life or your own mortality. You will be passed by in the end. Love will end, life will end. Let go. So, is it a depressing story? Only insofar. Yes, it's a Keatsian story, isn't it? It's something that celebrates life, and it's framed within the loss of that. Yes, and it's something that celebrates love, but it's framed within the loss of that love as well.